Good morning.
Popular meeting when people actually show up on time. You got to call people out of the gate.
I'm always on time or completely missing.
Your note taker represents you at these meetings.
Well, now that I keep doing all the YouTube recordings, I have to be sure that it auto joins and records it even if I'm not here.
You know, I kind of wonder, like I think we're using like a free Google account or something like that for these meetings, but now Google has like transcription and like all these other things. It might be really nice to get it under like an enterprise account so that we can like not only send out a recording but like a transcription with it. I don't even know how that works though. I've never used it.
I assume it's okay. I think we have it on for our little stuff, and I see it pop up every once in a while. So right now I'm using this free thing, like a free account on Fathom, which does a summary. That's what goes in the YouTube notes. Like, I'm not writing that. I just take whatever it generated. But you have to pay more to get it to do like a full transcription or whatever.
Yeah. I didn't looked at the notes or anything, but like I do know that people sometimes post the video, and if you don't post to like with the seconds of like where the conversation was, it's actually hard to figure out. Well, we said that we talked about it here, but then you're like scrolling through an hour-long video trying to figure out, well, when was it actually?
But we do this. So that is one of the things that comes in this free version. You can do chronological notes, so it puts in the timestamps. We run it through a little regex, and it puts it in the YouTube format, and that's what's up there.
I've just seen people post in like discussion threads, like just the link to the video, and then I'm like, I click it, and it's like the beginning of the video. I'm like, I'm not gonna sit through it.
Well, they're definitely in the description. So.
Okay.
That's cool. It's like chapters.
Yeah, you thank Brian Olson next time you see him, because he figured out this whole procedure and then taught me how he's doing it. It's documented now on the top of our of the notes for this meeting. You'll see that we wrote it up exactly what we do each time to generate this. So mostly so I don't forget in between each meeting how we did it last time. Why does my photo keep disappearing? There we go. No one needs to see how dirty my kitchen is.
It's not the season, and definitely not in New Orleans to have snow.
It was a one-time event. This was like 5 weeks ago. We had sub-zero temperatures for a week, which again,
right.
And then we had like 8 inches of snow.
That's crazy.
Which also never happens. So the whole city just shut down for a week.
Yeah. What is that, like every 50 years? Something like that happens?
Apparently the last snow this large was 1920.
Hey, 100-year event.
Yep. Yeah, we're in the mid-70s right now, so that's how different it is. Just 3 weeks.
I used to work for the government, and when it would snow, they'd actually shut down, and we had snow days, which was wonderful. All this remote work, gotta work anyway.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's a bad thing about remote work is people figured out how to work not like at home. I think even for school kids, they have remote days now instead of snow days, which is just terrible. Because like those are the best days as kids, you know.
I could still get snow days.
I think during COVID they figured out like, oh, we can have school at home, and then it just from there they just extrapolated.
All right, well, let's get started. Thank you for everyone who contributed to highlights this week. It was awesome to come and see that they were mostly done this morning. So thank you guys. So I'll start with Java and then I'll hand it off. So Java 1.7.2 release is out. Thank you, JB, for being the release manager and making sure that happened. It looks like we had a few RCs, and so yeah, thanks for pursuing that and getting it done. Good to make that a release that can be used. Next, I want to thank Iowa and everyone working on the variant side of things. We've had a lot of a lot of things going in. Really great to see the progress on variant. I think we're very close. At this point, we need to figure out what we're doing for engines, because the support in Iceberg is now ahead of support in engines that integrate with Iceberg. So good problem to have, right? We kind of want to be out ahead. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Thanks to Russell for fixing the equality deletes and copy on write correctness bug. This is probably a good time to highlight that there was a correctness bug when you were using a copy on write strategy with like a merge command in Spark, and had equality deletes. We use the filter that's pushed down to match files. We match equality deletes, assuming that you're going to use that filter when you read in the engine. However, with the copy on write strategy, you don't apply the filter because you carry forward deleted rows. And so, well, sorry, no, you don't carry forward deleted rows, you carry forward existing rows. So we were accidentally able to skip any rows that were, that didn't match that delete filter. So in some cases, we would bring back rows with that copy on write strategy. Great to have that fixed. It turns out it was just adding another case to an existing API call that we'd already plumbed through to avoid exactly this issue. So like nice to have it done. Then next, I want to highlight that in the REST catalog, at least the client, the auth manager was committed and is in. So really great to have that. I see a lot of bugs being worked out on the auth manager stuff. And I think we had a patch make it into like 1.8.1. So be careful, but it's great to have the new framework in there. So thanks, Alex. Next, I want to thank Edward for adding the rewrite from V2 deletes to V3 DVs in Spark. Nice to have that done. That'll help people as they migrate from V2 to the easier and better V3 deletes. And then thanks to Swapna for adding support for create table like on the Flink side. And yes, the partition stat writer also went in. Oh, I didn't see that. So good to have that one too. Next, oh yeah, the next I'll cover spec, and then we can move on to Rust. Thanks Xeon for putting up all of the geo spec. We found a few things that were that we could improve during the implementation PR, at least to get the types in. So please go take a look at those. I think it is simplifying the types so that they have simple type names, just like the fixed or decimal types. And also another one that I'm forgetting, but great to see that happening. And so please go check that out and vote. And I will hand it off for Rust. Who wants to do the Rust highlights?
I can do it.
Right.
So for Rust, a lot of activity, a lot of small also going in, but these are the highlights. So we have support for the REST paginate support. So if you have a lot of tables in your schema, that will go much smoother because you can paginate. We have support for adding existing Parquet files, thanks to Jonathan. And we have also had bug fix regarding the clean logic. That's actually a bug that I introduced. I wasn't aware of this, but it was actually ignoring like non-values. So that was great to get fixed by Scott. Also worked on a new roadmap for Iceberg Rust, just to get like to identify the gaps, what needs to be done, especially on the right side. So that's very exciting, and hopefully get more people from the community involved. Also by Iceberg, we just had like the 0.9 release out. thanks Drew for running that. A lot of new stuff in there. Also the merge upsert method. I actually used in one of my personal projects, and it's very nice. Makes it much easier. We also had the unknown type, so that's in. Thanks Kaushik. And we're also working on the rest of the free stuff, so that's also really cool. Also take a go. Anyone else? Otherwise, I'll just keep on rambling. So for Go, it was Matt who was doing a lot of work on the right side of things. So there's both like appending like arrow tables, but also appending existing files. Actually pretty nice because it also identified some issues on the Iceberg side because it was like porting over this code, so that was really good. And we had like a framework, or also Matt added a framework for the REST catalog integration test, so that will also make it easier just to make sure that we validate all the logic. We can create like tables and just check, do all the round trips. So that's really nice to make sure that we make sure that everything works well and we don't break anything later on. For the C++, there's like a very interesting discussion going on providing bindings. So there was a discussion by Renny and Xuan who are doing a lot of work on the Rust side, and Yuan, David, and Gang are very active on the C++ side. So they're mostly coming from the aerospace. So yeah, so please check it out if you're interested in it and give your opinion on it. I think it would be nice because there's a lot of velocity on the Rust side. So yeah, if we can reuse all this work on the C++ side, I think that would be like a win-win situation. So yeah, I'm very excited to see like what comes out of that because I'm not so efficient in C++, a bit on Rust, but that's it. Want to go next for the releases?
Awesome. Well, I'll hand it off to Ajantha, who's the release manager for the 1.9 release. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. As we discussed in the last time during 1.8.0, we are planning to have an early release for 1.9.0 with the things which are missed in 1.8.0. So now we have Auth Manager and the partition stats and Spark 3.3 removal. These three are the major things that are going in a 1.9.0 release. But I also saw now that Spark 4.0 is RC3 is going on, so I think we can include that as well in the release if we can complete it in a week or so. I also have a 1.9.0 milestone, so if people feel if they have any issue to include it for the release, they can add it with that. So the plan is to wait for a week or so and then do an RC cut.
Okay. Does anyone have opinions on the Spark v4? We've kind of tossed around the idea since the PR for that is getting close, and also the RCs are getting close to a real Spark 4 release. We've discussed adding Spark 4 based on the candidates that are available upstream. Just to start making sure that we, have all of our support working and get that in like a preview state. Now, I think it would be, it's not normal for us to do a module based on a preview release of an upstream. So I want to make sure that there aren't any, objections for doing that. Also, like whether or not it's a good idea to include it in the 1.9 release. Obviously there's the will it be ready on time? It sounds like Ajantha wants to cut that RC, next week. But also should we let it bake for longer or something like that? So I wanted to make sure we were just discussing that and everyone was sort of behind what we want to do there.
So I'll just add a comment because I've been talking with people about this. The Spark forward port for 4.0 is like a really big change, and it's been sitting out there in like somebody's PR for a really long time, and it's a little difficult for us to start testing new functionality, especially v3 capabilities on like somebody else's branch, and we don't really do like branch-based development that then would, later at some point we merge in. So I think there's actually a lot of added value in getting it in. There is the concern that there may be confusion, but like we also want to make sure that we have a release close to the Spark 4 release so that we don't end up like with months and months between like Spark 4 coming out and us having a release out. So I'm a big fan, even though there may be a little confusion about like, oh, what does this mean when we get close to that like Spark release, and if we overlap with that release timeline by a few weeks or something like that. I still think there's a lot of value in including it.
I just wanted to highlight we have the exact same situation with Flink 2. Like Flink 2 is, we have a preview version of Flink 2, and I'm not entirely sure that we would like to support that, but the work, it is good to test it out and try it out. The thing is, there the changes are a little bit smaller, so that there is not a huge change in code guys, but the exact same situation.
I mean, I think it would make sense to do this for Flink as well. I don't know what the timeline on Flink 2 is though, so I defer to you guys on when it's a good time to get that module in. But especially with some of the new support on the Spark side, I'm kind of interested in getting it in. Like Spark doesn't have a variant type until V4. And it would be really nice to be able to, actually test our variant type with at least one engine. I think it's, it's functioning perfectly well, but the end-to-end tests for like writing variants, shredding them, skipping data values, and things like that. I would really love to get those end-to-end tests in as quickly as we can. Yeah.
So the Flink one actually brings an interesting question for me, which is like, we don't want to set a precedent that we can just like add anything that might be coming out in the future. I think we need to make sure that like, if we are going to do something like this, that it is pretty seriously committed to, which like obviously Spark 4 is, it's relatively close. We're not like going to be holding this for years as a speculative kind of addition to the baseline. And it sounds like Flink is probably in the same in the same vein, like there's full intention to do that, but we also don't want anything that would be like a speculative release way before it's ready. Like we're actually pretty close across both of those fronts. So yeah, just that's the other concern. It's just like we don't want to be like throwing things into the baseline hoping that eventually it gets released.
Actually, Flink is simpler. I think that Flink 2.0 is already approved. It's just the kind of artifacts not kind of shit yet. So
that's
the
really
opposite, yeah. And also the change is actually small. But Flink, they do keep all the Lex API, what's called Lex module. So they actually didn't remove all of the API. So in terms of the change on the integration is also not too complicated.
If there is API stability coming in Flink, should we be rethinking our strategy for Flink integration? On the Spark side, it seems like there was a lot of pain in trying to use newer APIs. We had Spark taking over things like merge and update commands. But ideally, the connector APIs for these engines would stabilize, and we would be able to cleanly plug in across multiple, major versions. Or sorry, minor versions, right? Like, so I guess the question is, do we expect to be able to use the same connector APIs in Flink in 2.1 or 2.2?
Yes, actually the change from let's say 1.x to 2.x in Flink doesn't change the connect API. Yeah, there already new connect API in the 1.x. It's just they probably mark old API as deprecated. They haven't removed them yet. So, but yeah, but eventually we remove the old API.
Oh, sorry, Steve.
Yeah, go ahead.
Flink 2, I believe the connector API is already stable. Though I was also active in the Flink community in 1.x. It is the new API is designed, and the just legacy one is still around. And with Flink 2, they will deprecate the legacy ones. Even Max is reach out to our Iceberg mail list for that changing it, because it's for a while, most probably since 1.15. everybody use the the latest API version and it's stable.
So I guess we'll see it like the 2.1 boundary, but maybe this can be our last version where we copy the connector into a new version, and maybe we can continue reusing the same code, because it would take a lot of the burden off if we could use the connector, the same connector version across multiple versions of Flink.
And it's also confusing, the people are keep asking that, like, what is the differences? And when I check that, there is no any differences most of the time.
Yeah, it was probably just that we were
Very
it was rapidly changing at the start, and so if we can get rid of that, that would be really helpful. Awesome. Let's look into that for Flink 2, or sorry, 2.1, I guess. But for Flink 2, we'll just have to get that in as soon as we can. Thanks, guys. All right. Moving on, we're getting close on the V3 spec changes. We've got implementations, I think, pretty rapidly evolving, and we're very close on a number of items. So I wanted to basically start tracking this as a release in these discussions, so that we can drive it to close over the next hopefully month or so. I think we're actually that close to being able to do it. So that said, there are a couple of outstanding things that I think we want to highlight. So first of all, on row lineage, there's one discussion that I think we need to have, which is, we originally envisioned row lineage as incompatible with equality deletes. And then we sort of thought about it a little more and said, well, any deletes that don't know about row lineage are essentially deletes and inserts, right? You get a brand new row ID, and you get a new last updated sequence number for every single row that is added through anything that doesn't support the deletes. And we know that chances are there are going to be people who write to V3 tables with row lineage on that don't carry forward those IDs, and there's just not much we can do about it. On the flip side, if row lineage needs to be enabled, we have the first table feature that is optional and needs to be opted into by users. And that creates a very awkward situation where you can't actually rely on it in engines without getting users to do something. So what we did was we discussed, it turns out equality deletes and other things are actually compatible with a lineage. You just, treat them as deleted, and, the upsert will always be a delete and an insert, but that should be okay. That's just the behavior you get with row lineage and an upsert type case. So we've already allowed that. And I think the next step is to remove the ability to enable or disable row lineage. So I would argue row lineage should be on by default for all tables. And if you have an engine that does not support row lineage, you simply don't get very good row lineage, right? You wouldn't be able to track rows through operations like merge, but it doesn't actually break the table. So I think it would be much better to consider row lineage on by default, and that way we can rely on it, and engines are expected to produce it if they support row lineage. Dan?
Can we dig a little bit more into your statement about, so you don't get very good row lineage? So what does it mean for writers to a V3 table that don't support row lineage? Can they not write? Can they just simply say, hey, these were deleted, these were added, but I'm not going to track the lineage? Or can they set bad values in the field because they don't want to actually do anything at all.
Well, so the thing is, we should say, and I think we will say, engines must support row lineage if you are modifying a row, right? So take a simple SQL statement, update set column X equals whatever, where ID equals 10, right? Very simple, like go modify this row. In that case, we can say all we want, that an engine should preserve the row ID or must preserve the row ID, right? Engines are, almost certainly going to delete a row and add a row and consider that an update, right? Like we can't force them to when the ability to delete a row and add a row has the same effect on the table. So my point is, like, I don't believe that we will change engines' behaviors. I think that, in some engines, they would just say, well, the behavior of our engine on an update is to delete a row and add a row. And, we don't guarantee that the row ID matches. And that is perfectly fine for the semantics of that engine. However, what we don't want is engines that are participating in row lineage to say, oh, row lineage is turned off, so I shouldn't do this.
Yeah,
Right?
I think
we set the expectation that engines should always have row lineage, and then get users to complain to the engines that don't respect it and don't preserve the row IDs.
Yeah, I think my concern was that, like, if we make it a mandate that they must, then we'll actually limit adoption of V3, because people who can't track that row lineage will just say, well, we can read V3, but we aren't going to bother writing it because we don't want to have to comply with the row lineage requirements. So if we allow them to do a delete and add, at least that's a compromise that you still get change information. It's just not going to be with the fidelity of actually having the row IDs.
Is it that onerous of a requirement to pass through a row ID column? All right, Russell, I think you were next.
Yeah, I don't think I have a problem with even the resetting of things. I think it's fine for the update cases. The only thing I'd be worried about is for maintenance engines, because they could potentially basically add new changes to the data set that aren't actually changes. So that would be the bad behavior of a rewriter or a maintenance engine that just goes in and does this without paying attention to row lineage.
Yeah, I agree. I think we would want those things to not modify the data.
Well, I mean, they have to start materializing new data. They have to. A rewriter has to materialize values that were previously implicitly associated with the row.
And I think that is the right call, right? I mean, they need to do that on tables with row lineage enabled anyway.
Yeah.
And so we're going to be, adding that to all of the procedures that maintain table data. I think that it's well worth putting more weight on needing to do that, as long as we can rely on lineage for the use cases where it's needed, right? Like we're talking, the change data coming out of a table can be accurate if you have row lineage, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't want the situation, or at least I'm arguing that we don't want the situation where some tables have, good fine-grained changes coming out, and some tables just don't.
Mm.
That's my concern, is that we have this feature that is almost invisible to users, and what is the value of having it turned off?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like we do have now. I don't know. Realistically, we've had a lot of integrations where certain parts of the spec are supported at different times, and so I don't know if it's as clear that this is the first time we have something that's switched on, because essentially variant, geotype, all these things are essentially feature flags, right? Like unless a user adds them to their table, then a reader that doesn't support them still works, and a writer that doesn't support them still works. This would be like a global, like all readers and writers must support this.
It's
Otherwise,
like sequence nodes or something like that. You know, when we added features that are inherent metadata and tracking, we said like, yeah, you have to do this.
And that is the situation. These are inherent to the metadata and tracking. If you just ignore it, you get deletes and inserts, right? And so like I would much rather have a situation where, sure, you get deletes and inserts for things that are buggy or haven't been updated yet, but in the end, you know, we can actually rely on this feature and get good data.
Okay, so worst case scenario is we have an engine that generates inserts and deletes instead of that for both maintenance operations and all copy and write operations.
I think people would either cry foul for maintenance operations or just not use that for maintenance if it's not preserving it and you need it for row lineage. Or you would have to disable it and use something else for management of the table. But I think like I would not overly index on the maintenance side as a reason why we would not want to do this, because that can just like those are areas where you would expect people would pay attention.
Yeah, I think I'm convinced. Yeah, I think the worst case scenario here is not that bad for users, so I don't think there's a problem with that. So should we then just pull all of the fields associated with it and just move it back to just always being assumed to be on?
Yeah, I think so. I think for a V3, all of our checks in the core module would simply be if this table is V3, instead of if it's V3 and lineage is enabled. Peter, I think you were next, right?
Thanks. I'm thinking about, is there a way to highlight the user that this table's role image is messed up? Because there was some writers that did some edgy things.
We can't actually detect that. I mean, you could, in table metadata, it looks like deleted rows and inserted rows. And, you know, that could actually be what you're doing. For instance, the dynamic overwrite that we support for partition overwrites, right? That actually does go and delete all the data in a partition and replace it with new data. As far as I know, there is no way for those operations to preserve row lineage. So like it's perfectly valid to say like these files are deleted, these files are added, and there is no relationship between them.
I'm also thinking about like for Flink, the equality delete, it's very hard to generate these row IDs, but at least we could say that this table has written something by Flink and there are updates there. So please be aware that the row lineage is not correct for this table. Before it was turned off for the table, and we can check for the table if the feature is turned on or off, and we won't write to tables where the feature is turned on. That's a possibility. But if we don't have this flag on the table, then we don't there is no way to notify the user that we wrote in this table and you couldn't rely on the row image.
I think though that is something that we already sort of like that is known, because if Flink is writing to a V3 table with equality deletes, then we already know that we're not preserving row lineage. Right. So there's
that user know.
I mean, we could. I think it's a better system to say like, I know that row lineage doesn't, or sorry, I know that upserts don't preserve row lineage, so I'm not going to use upserts.
I would actually say that this is like there's a parallel to this in terms of like what we've talked about in terms of transactional behavior, right? It's an engine behavior. People need to understand how the engine operates and what it's going to do. And the table format is just facilitating what the engine is actually, you know, the operations the engine is performing. So in this case, like if you're using Flink, you expect row lineage, you have to understand that it's going to be adds and deletes, right? That's the behavior of the engine. It's not, it's not that, it's violating something. It's just the behavior. Whereas Spark, because it is touching the rows and it can determine which rows are actually being deleted, it would actually potentially preserve that information. So I think there are parallels where there are different behaviors, and I would say transactions is one of those.
Yeah, I still think so. In my head, the writer and the reader could be absolutely different. The reader might don't know anything about the writer. In this case, if you don't know if it's written by Flink, I just know that I have an Iceberg table with the data. Then I don't have a clear understanding what's there and what is working and what is not.
So I think that the reader in this case, though, right, like in the case where you're using equality deletes are used in order to avoid reading the table at write time. And so, of course, if you can't read the table at write time, you don't know whether an upsert is replacing a row and has a row lineage relationship, or if the row is being inserted. So, like, by definition, for equality deletes, you are not preserving lineage because you're not reading the data. So I think that is a very clear distinction. And like that is just the behavior of equality deletes with respect to row lineage.
Equality deletes could be used just removing data.
They could, yes.
And then the row lineage is correct.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it is perfectly reasonable to say row lineage is correct in terms of upsert, right? An upsert is a new row.
So I think what we're saying is like the semantics of doing adds and deletes is not wrong by definition, right? We're saying that is one way of doing row lineage. Another way is to actually provide, the identifiers of which rows are being updated or preserve them. Either one of those is fine. And the semantics of what the engine is doing or how the engine behaves is not something that we're trying to define. We're saying, hey, if a engine like the, replace partition or something like that, that semantically may mean delete all the rows, add all the rows back. And all the rows are exactly the same. Like one engine may say, hey, I interpret that as a full delete and a full add. Another one may say, hey, I know more detail about this and I'm going to actually update every single one of those rows. It's a behavior of the engine. But there's no like wrong or right.
And you would still have the ability to do the same row lineage that you do today, which is, I have a non-implicit row ID with which I'm upserting, and you can do your lineage calculations based on that row ID. Right. So in a table that you're feeding with Flink using upsert, you would just do the join and window to gather rows by that ID and from the change log and have that history there. So I don't think it is that different.
Okay, I absolutely agree with this kind of approach. I agree with that. My question is that should we have a way to notify the user that they shouldn't have to rely on the row ID? This is just the only question I'm trying to raise. But we can discuss it.
Yeah, I
mean, you could imagine like doing something on the summary with the commit indicating like rows preserved or like row IDs preserved or something like that. I'm not sure, other than just like knowing how the engines operate, if it's worth introducing.
This is worth I think giving some thought to, like how people can understand what's going on in their tables. We only have about 20 minutes left, so I do want to get to Stephen's comment and then get to some of the other V3 items.
Yeah, I think initially I was thinking about, hey, if this feature was enabled on the table, what does it mean for the reader? Right? I think the previous discussion pretty much answered my question. It depends on how the writer implement that the semantic for the row lineage, right? So that's what the reader gets. Whatever the writer decide to do, that's what they get. Or in the first version, that when Ross had that we say, hey, let's say for upsert, you have to maintain that proper limit, but later on we relax that rule, say, hey, if you want to implement the semantic way to delete then add, fine, let's relax that in the spec. So that's what then the reader will get that semantic. So I think Dan also touched on that. I think in that sense, sure, yes. So basically, whatever the writer decide to implement, that's what you're gonna get. So with that, I think setting the env by default seems to be okay. I feel, yeah.
Okay, so it sounds like we're fairly comfortable, at least in this group, going and enabling row lineage in v3 all the time, and saying you should produce row lineage information, but if you don't, that is the semantic of the engine that everything is a delete and an insert. I think that will really help on the ability to use this information. So what we should do is follow up on the mailing list. Anyone want to take this, Dan?
Yeah, I can take it.
Awesome. Because I think we're the ones proposing it. All right. I want to move on to a few more items in V3. So the first one is just a quick mention. In variant, we are reaching sort of an area where it's difficult to move forward. And that is because we don't have the Parquet annotation to rely on. So what we've been doing so far is we have been relying on a combination of the Parquet schema and the Iceberg schema to detect variants and inject handling for variant. That is not great. We're getting to places where I was just taking a look at Flink yesterday, and the problem is Flink has a writer where we're using the Flink schema and the Parquet schema. We don't have the Iceberg schema at that point because we didn't need it in the past. So do we want to introduce 3 schemas, or I think ideally when we are writing and we have produced a Parquet schema from an Iceberg schema, what we would do is actually know that the Parquet schema is storing a variant. And to do this, we need that annotation in Parquet. So basically, to continue on our path, we would really love to be able to properly label variant data, which we've been working around until this point. So that is all to say, please go and, if you can, reply to the thread in the Parquet community on releasing the variant annotation. We've already, added geo annotations, so there is precedent for doing it. I think that the fear is that people will assume that variant has been finalized, but at this point, I think it's going to take longer to finalize the type if we don't actually release an annotation for it. So please go take a look at that and support that if you agree. Next thing, I'm going to skip down to orc. We have a couple things that will probably consume a bit of time with respect to orc. So actually, I'm going to skip that for 1 second and note that the Iceberg Summit is in 3 weeks, and this first agenda item. So this is the last sync before Summit. Do we want to have another one and postpone? Do we want to skip, or just see everyone at Summit and talk there? See everyone at Summit and talk there. That sounds good. We'll skip it. Okay, we'll see everyone at Summit, and now jumping back up to orc. Orc is presenting some problems right now, where Orc needs substantial rewrites in order to support default values. At least when I looked at it, it did not look simple for us to inject default value readers because of the separation between where we produce the read schema and where we build the readers. we also have, the need for new row lineage in orc. I just implemented a variant and some other types in orc, and that's going in. But the orc support in general is seriously lagging behind the other languages. So, do we have anyone that needs orc support, cares about orc support, wants to, continue maintaining it?
So I know that I've been speaking with some of the people that use orc, and they still intend to use it. But there's a question of like whether they have bandwidth to support it going forward. So I'm happy to follow up with them directly and see if there is any intention there. But if anybody else here is using orc or cares about it, please let us know.
I think we're getting to a point where we should probably consider deprecating it, and that's because a lot of engines don't support it, and it's very difficult to add support for required features, required correctness features like default values. In fact, if you have a table that gets converted to v3 and then adds a default value, you cannot read that table. So like there are some very serious issues with orc that either prevent us from using v3 features, or prevent. I don't know if we want to actually gate v3 on support for some of this. That would be a pretty drastic measure.
So I think we have an option to at least postpone the question of deprecation and allow us to roll forward with v3, which would just be that if your format for the table is set to orc, you cannot promote to v3. That doesn't mean that we necessarily have to say orc is out v3 plus, but it gives an opportunity for orc to catch up and allow us to move forward without being blocked by the orc features. There is still the nuanced case of you've got mixed format within your table. It's currently set to Parquet, but you've got orc files, in which case you're going to have a bad experience upgrading to v3. But I don't think that that's the typical case. Like, I think most people are either using orc or they're using Parquet. So that may be an option to kind of defer the question of like, do we have investment to do this? And if somebody does come forward and say, yeah, we do want to do it, we don't want that to then block progress on v3.
I kind of agree with Dan here, because I know people who are using ORC. I know they currently doesn't have a bandwidth. It doesn't mean that they will not have bandwidth later. It doesn't mean I don't have bandwidth later, but it takes time. So I think V2 is working with ORC. They have want to work with ORC. So it would be good to give them a little bit more time to decide. And we can say that if we start working on V4 specification and still doesn't have anything in V3, then it's fair to say that, okay, then we will remove them. So
I'm undecided here, but I'm going to take the opposite. I'm going to take the anti-viewpoint, which is that we cannot, like, default values is a good example of a feature that prevents a table from upgrading to v3. But because you cannot read the data correctly from orc files, given a default value, a non-null default value in one of the columns, we just cannot upgrade a table to v3 and then allow regular schema evolution on it. Now, I understand the idea of, well, let's just not upgrade orc tables to v3, and hopefully we will be able to lift that restriction later. But how long are we going to wait? And like, we haven't seen serious investment in orc for quite some time. So v3 is a really great opportunity for us to say, don't write orc files into these tables, and v3 tables, I guess, can't have orc. I mean, we could at least say v3 tables can't have orc until orc supports the features.
But what are the features? Is default value enough, or we still want to have a full feature set of reads?
Well, so I'm assuming, well, at the very least, you need to support default values in row lineage, right? So I've implemented, at least for core, things like nanosecond timestamps, removing unknown, things like that. But and variant, I also added variant support in an open PR. But like without default value support, you cannot read older files correctly, and without row lineage support, you basically cannot produce the required last updated sequence number or row ID for a row.
I think we also have some gaps in internal data, so partition stats potentially, and any other representation where you would actually want your format to match your table. That
I'm strongly opposed to internal data supporting ORC at this point, because that just opens up another set of issues where then we have mixed formats in table metadata.
Well, I wasn't talking about table metadata. It was like partition stats is the other thing that uses internal data right now that actually writes a part.
Oh, does it use internal data now?
Well,
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Oh, right, it's the
generics.
Yeah, generics. Okay. So I would say, like, this is an opportunity for us to prevent more problems for users by, saying, like, until ORC is supported, we're going to block allowing ORC in v3. Of course, I guess that's kind of you can't undo that decision, right? Because if we said ORC is not supported in v3, then a bunch of people would simply, never support ORC, which is, I guess, the situation we're in with most engines today, or a lot of engines today, where I don't think any of the other language implementations support ORC. Maybe Arrow.
I mean, isn't this a library distinction and not a table format distinction? Like our library doesn't support lots of file formats that could potentially fit the Iceberg spec, but
we specifically call out the file formats in the spec, and we have implementation notes about them. Like it's a little bit more involved than just like generic file support.
The spec needs to call out the formats that should be supported for compatibility, right? Because we want people to be able to read and write from different engines and agree on the set of file formats that they might find there. The trouble is today we don't have a consistent set of things that engines can read and write. Everything can read and write Avro because Avro is the metadata format, and Parquet is the by far the dominant data format.
We actually have a little problem here because there's like a couple things that are spec related with ORC. The variant implementation, like how is variant stored, like that's missing from ORC. But the bigger portion is actually the reference implementation side, right? Default values is not necessarily like a ORC spec issue. It's a reference implementation issue. So I'm not sure how much we need to say in the spec that ORC is not supported. The reference implementation will block it until we have the functionality. And then if it just never arrives, then it's never supported. But it puts us in a weird position between like all the information we have in the spec about the file formats versus what the reference implementation supports.
Well, and if the reference implementation doesn't support it, should it be supported in the spec?
On the other hand, I think it's to be
multi-array transforms that are currently in the spec for v3, and we don't have anyone working on that yet.
Wait, which one did you say, Russell?
Multi-array transforms. But JB did say he was going to start looking at that today, actually. So maybe we will have that. But I'm just saying, it does seem like it's our implementation issue. I don't know if we have to call it out specifically in the spec.
So one thing that we could do, I mean, just thinking of options for how do we make this more clear from the spec perspective, like we have like our compatibility matrix page right now, and it has a nice little chart of like which formats, which features, and we could introduce that. That doesn't prevent us from updating it without requiring a new Iceberg spec version, because we're not changing anything about the spec. We're just showing what is currently supported. So I don't even know if that belongs in the spec, or we just point to, hey, here's the current compatibility or implementation matrix.
I think it's reasonable to say, like, we will block things in the reference implementation and give it a full version before removing support. We should probably do what you're saying, Dan, and signal that this is an area where we're looking to the community to, you know, start maintaining the org support, or it will be, you know, deprecated and removed in v4.
I don't want to get into too many implementation details here, but like, do we have a quick way to actually check whether or not there are ORC files in a table? Or is this something where we're going to force every upgrader now to open every single file and check, or check all their manifests?
I wouldn't enforce it. I would just look at what the current table format version is. Like the.
Okay. Fair enough.
I mean,
but we still need to have runtime checks then for our ORC readers. On like, you're in the middle of a v3 read. We let you do this, and now it's going to be wrong. So we gotta.
Well, we have those runtime checks already. So
okay.
if you have an org file with a default value in the Iceberg schema today, it'll blow up.
Okay. Then I think just doing default is fine. Like if you see default format version, like Daniel was suggesting.
Yeah, and if we need to, we can go scan the metadata to verify that there are no org files in there. But I agree with Dan, that's probably not necessary at this point.
I just don't want to do that for every table. Like, I'm thinking about people who have like a 10 million file table, and I don't want them to have to open all their manifests to change their metadata JSON format version.
Yeah, I think the only confusing thing would be if you have a table that's org and you're currently writing org, and then we say you can't upgrade an org table to v3, you change it to Parquet, and then you upgrade. We let it go through, even though it's got a bunch of org files in it.
Well, we already told you though that we weren't going to let you do it. You ignored the message and found a way around it. That's on you.
Fair enough.
Just point back to an older metadata JSON and do a rewrite data files.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. We're at time. Sorry that we didn't get to a bunch of the discussions like relative paths, server-side planning, file format API. I'm guessing on the file format API, we need more reviews, people looking at it.
Basically, we have 3 questions. I will send a letter to the dev list, and we can continue there. I think it will be a longer discussion. We have some decision to do.
Sounds great.
Cool.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.
Talat, this is also your first time here. I want to make sure if you had something to say.
Thank you. You know, actually I added that relative path questions on the agenda item. I just want to know our decision. Are we going to have the v3 relative paths support v3 spec, or if I start working on it, there is a time for that? You know, I am very interested in the relative paths change, and also I saw that community has some tickets. Even there is a repo someone is implemented relative paths. You know,
So I think that the short answer is we're trying to get v3 done, and we probably want to defer relative paths to v4 because there's a lot in v3 that, you know, we're moving towards completion, and it's a little late to add relative paths to that milestone. But I think that there is interest, at least from my side, on getting relative paths into v4. So I'd love to start working with you on it.
Okay, I see. But if we are fast enough, do you think that we can make it?
No, almost certainly.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, guys. Bye.